All right, let's dive in and demystify MongoDB. You might not know the name, but it's the powerhouse behind a ton of the apps you use every single day. And its whole reason for being, it's a master at handling the kind of messy, unpredictable data that makes the modern web actually work. So let's figure out how it tames all that chaos. First up, a quick question for you. Think about all the data in your life. Is it all perfectly organized in neat rows and columns, just like a spreadsheet? Or is it a bit more like a file cabinet that's just overflowing with stuff? You know, different kinds of documents, folders inside of folders, photos, little sticky notes. Yeah, for most modern apps, it is definitely the file cabinet. And that one simple reality is exactly why older databases just started to crack under the pressure. And you know, that pressure point, it basically triggered a full-blown data revolution. The very nature of information itself was changing, and the tools we were using needed a serious, radical upgrade just to keep up. I mean, think about it, right? A user profile on a social media site isn't just a name and an email anymore. It's this whole tangled web, a list of friends, maybe some nested addresses, an array of photos, and each of those photos has its own data. An online product has reviews, a list of color options, unique specs. Trying to cram all of that into a rigid, old-school table, it just doesn't work. The whole system starts to buckle. So with all this messy, complex data flying all over the internet, computers needed a common language to describe it. And that language is JSON. It is absolutely the key to understanding how we brought some order to all that chaos. I mean, just look at the difference here. On the left, you've got the old way, a format called XML. It's just cluttered with all these tags. It's heavy, it's clunky, it's hard to read. But then you look to the right and you see JSON. It's clean, it's lightweight, it's way more intuitive. You can instantly see it's a book with a title and some authors. And that simplicity, that's exactly why it became the standard for the web. You know, the real power of JSON is just how simple it is. Everything you see is built from just two basic structures. First, you've got objects, which are just simple key-value pairs, like a label and its data. And second, you have arrays, which are just ordered lists of things. That's it. And with those two simple building blocks, you can model almost any kind of complex data imaginable. It's amazing. All right, so we have a new kind of data, and we have a language, JSON, to describe it. The missing piece of the puzzle was a database that could actually think in that language. And, well, that's where MongoDB enters our story. So MongoDB came on the scene back in 2007 as a real pioneer of this NoSQL movement. Now, that name doesn't mean no to SQL, it really means not only SQL. It was kind of like a rebellion against the idea that rigid tables were the only way to store data. Its whole philosophy was simple. Handle that flexible JSON data natively, scale out by just adding more cheap servers instead of one giant expensive one, and, of course, fit perfectly into a modern developer's toolkit. So how does it all fit together? Honestly, the library analogy on this slide is perfect. At the highest level, you've got the database. That's the entire library building. Inside the library, you have collections, which are like the different bookshelves for specific topics. One for users, another for products, another for orders, and then finally, you have the individual documents. Each one is like a single book on the shelf, and it's stored as its own flexible JSON object. Okay, storing all this data is one thing, but it's pretty useless if you can't find what you're looking for, right? So how do we actually ask the database questions? Well, that's where querying comes in. Let's start with a super simple, everyday question you might ask an online bookstore. In plain English, we just want to find all the books that cost less than $50. Simple enough, right? And here's the answer in MongoDB's language. Now, I know at first glance it might look a little bit like code, but look closer. The part inside the find command, that's just another JSON object. We're literally just describing what we want. We're saying, look in the price field and find a value that is less than or $LT 50. It's a beautifully logical system when you see it that way. And this right here? This is the big breakthrough idea. You don't have to go learn some totally separate, complex language just for your queries. You use JSON, the language of your data, to ask questions about your data. It's just a completely seamless and really powerful way to work. But what about the really tough questions? What if you need to filter your data, then group it and then sort it all in one go? Well, for that, MongoDB has this incredibly powerful tool that works just like a data assembly line. This is called the Aggregation Pipeline. And the concept is actually pretty simple. You take all your documents and you feed them into one end of this pipeline. The pipeline itself is made up of a series of stages, and at each stage, the data is filtered or transformed or reshaped before it gets passed on to the very next step. So let's follow the data through some of the key stages you see here. It starts at step 1, match. Think of this like quality control. It filters out any documents we don't need. From there, it moves to step 2, $group, which organizes and summarizes whatever's left. Next up, at step 3, $sort, arranges the results in the order we want. And finally, step 4, $project, acts like the packaging department, shaping the final output to show us only the exact fields we care about. So here's a quick, powerful example of how this all works. Imagine you have a database of products. In the first stage, we could $match to find only the products in the electronics category. In the second stage, we could $project the results to show just their names and prices, nothing else. And in the final stage, we could $sort them from most to least expensive. See? Each stage just cleanly passes its results to the next, turning a really complex question into a series of simple, manageable steps. So, okay, we've covered JSON, documents, collections, we even dove into the aggregation pipeline. But let's zoom out for a second. Why does any of this stuff actually matter for the apps we all use every single day? Well, it really all comes down to these 4 key advantages. First, you've got flexibility. Developers can change their data on the fly without some rigid structure getting in the way. And that flexibility leads directly to number 2, speed. You can build and change your apps so much faster. Then there's scalability. When your app becomes a huge hit, you just add more servers to handle the load. And finally, there's power. With tools like the aggregation pipeline, you can ask incredibly sophisticated questions of your data. And all of that leaves us with one last big idea to think about. As our digital world just keeps generating more and more data that looks less like a neat little spreadsheet and more like a messy, interconnected web, are we basically watching the end of an era for those rigid tables? Databases like MongoDB are certainly making a very strong case that the future of data is, well, flexible.